working. Maybe you're too far away? The clicker is not working. Oh, no, we will. It's probably slow.
All right. Hello, everybody. Wow, what a crazy last night. CCP games, so many bruises, and then pub crawl, different types of bruises. It was a lot of fun. I'm CCP Burger.
I'm CCP Nobody.
CCP Blue Screen.
CCP Mörkur.
And we are here to representing the art department at CCP at EVE Online. We're here today to talk about the art of Abyssal Dead Space. Pretty beautiful. Like we talked about yesterday, one of the reasons why we kind of went into this work is that we wanted to create proving grounds for like new tech, new art, things, and new types of gameplay. And there's been a lot of ideas floating around in the art team for years that have been kind of, really difficult to properly test out and prove out, because we don't want to like offset the balance of the universe, and because art sometimes takes up tiny bit of memory, and we really want to maintain the quality and health of the game. One of the challenges the art team set themselves going into this was basically, how can we make the game look more like our trailers? And we've really been pushing hard to like really figure out and break down how to make these kind of super cinematic moments. And if you're in my presentation yesterday, then turn off UI, take screenshot, no Photoshop. There's like almost no Photoshop in this presentation. But there are a couple of caveats to this presentation. We are still working on Abyssal Dead Space, and we'll be working, till kind of, we ship, and then we'll continue work and push this further. So some of the stuff you're going to see today is still work in progress. We're still tweaking, we're still balancing, and we're still kind of, and we're also like, we haven't done the deep performance testing that we usually do. So, some things might change, and we might push some things a little bit further. But I'm going to give it over to CCP Nobody to tell you a little bit more about the tech behind the stuff that they're doing.
Thanks. Hi, I'm here representing the graphics programmers of the art team, and I want to show you what we've been brewing in our corner over the last few months. Our work sometimes starts with concept art like this, from the art side of Triglavian. And usually, when we see concepts like this, we start to sweat a little bit. But actually, we've been working towards this for quite some time. A few years back, we created an environment template system to change the mood around certain objects in space. And recently, our graphics or gameplay programmers moved around 4,000 dungeons to a more modern static data system. And our tools department created a tool in our content creation software so we could get artists to make dungeons look pretty badass. But what are these environment templates? It's a collection of graphical attributes that can be bound to an object in space. These attributes consist of a few post-processing parameters that control, for example, dynamic exposure, bloom, color lookup tables, fog, and, of course, God rays. It can also add static particles around predefined objects, alongside with stuff like sound and camera attachments, like the Nearfield particles that CCP Merkur is going to talk about. This means we can author environment or weather around objects to fit the mood that we want to provide. We introduced these templates in 2016 and initially only linked them to asteroid belts, incursion systems, and shattered wormhole systems. This was mainly done to maintain the current look of those places provided by the older rendering techniques. And after we worked out most of the kinks, we moved over to suns, which you might remember from last year, resource wars, and shipyards. In total, we added about 30 new templates over the last year, and for Abyssal Space, we added 15 more. So that brings us to dungeon weather. It has always been there in some aspect because of these guys. This is because we had a system in place to add weather around rock and ice asteroids in belts. So our dungeon designers used this feature to get fog and God rays for free. And that means that currently over 30% of our dungeons already have an environment map to them because they have some sort of asteroid hidden someplace in them. And it looks good enough, I guess. There you see the asteroid. But what happens if I go to the same dungeon in my Hulk with my strip miner and I mine that asteroid until depletion?
The asteroid is depleted.
It's not too graceful. So to avoid this from happening, we bind the templates to graphicless and or non-interactable objects in space in the new Abyssal dungeons. By the way, this strip miner was programmatically altered to mine 1 million times more in 1/10 of the time of regular ones. And no, you can't have it. So to get to here from the old environments, we didn't really need much new graphics tech, but we did need to work around the change of a fundamental piece of our rendering engine. Does anybody see what's missing from this picture? Sun. Yeah, it doesn't have a source for the light, and our rendering engine is set up in such a way that it always has a light direction. But our artists love their lens flares, so we decided to add support for them as dungeon objects. This means we can author dungeons with a specific lens flare in a specific position. And this really adds to the feel of the dungeons. But while we were working on these dungeons, we kept getting interrupted by this guy while we were navigating the scene. The reason is we have a lot of huge objects in these dungeons, some of which take up more than 50% of the screen. So the solution was to remove these huge objects from the pick buffer, which is used to select things in space. And this is okay, since most of these huge objects will be outside of the play area, protected by the gravitational shear of the space. So we don't really need to worry too much about player interaction with those huge things. But if you do feel adventurous, you can go through the play area boundary, but trust me, you'll be long dead before you reach those objects. But how do we visualize this boundary? The play area is confined to a sphere with a 75K radius, And it is imperative that we notify the player of the closeness to this danger zone. And we didn't want to have it always on, so we did need to implement a proximity shader. So this is fairly easy to do, since the player ship is always at the center of the rendered scene. So it should actually look a bit more like this. As the thing moves closer, it becomes red. So we define a radius r that represents the maximum distance to see the effect. And this means that if this is true, anywhere on the sphere, then we can see something. So let's see this in action. But what actually happens if we do go through? Since it is a dangerous world outside of this boundary, we really needed to show something very bad was happening when you exit the play area. First of all, you will see a new vignette effect around the edges of the screen. And the benefits of this effect is that it doesn't rely on the player ship being in view. But we also wanted some other effects on the ship as well. So we slapped two effects on for good measure. One is tightly bound to the geometry of the ship, while the other is kind of happening all around the ship. All of this together shows the gravitational shear tearing at your hull. And when you re-enter the play area, you should actually feel a bit safer. But you won't feel safe for too long, because these dungeons are filled with peril. And to talk about that, here's CCP Blue Screen to tell you all about what is in these dungeons.
Thank you. Yes, so going into this feature and building these new environments had some extremely interesting perspectives from us in the art department. Basically, with this new space came new rules. First off, we knew we were going to be working with a restricted play area, and this is the first time we do this, which gives us a lot of new possibilities. And another fundamental change we knew we wanted to make was we were going to limit the camera zoom. That also opens up for a whole lot of new options when we're building new environments. And obviously, a third variable to work in our favor here is the intended use of the environment. Basically, no, we will never have citadels, hundreds of players, or fleet fights going on here, which gives us some leeway on the performance of the environments. The limited play space and the restricted zoom really gives us the opportunity to create environments with a whole new level of immersion. That's very hard to do when something like this turns into something like this. And in general, just when you can zoom out 300 plus kilometers, it pretty much becomes impossible to place you inside an environment. And so this brought up something we've been wanting to do and wanting to start on for quite some time. It's something we actually briefly talked about when we were here at Fanfest last year. If you remember last year, we showed these new environment concepts. So this gave us the perfect opportunity for us to start moving on visions like this. With the restricted play area and camera zoom controls, we now had the perfect opportunity to make these environments as we had envisioned them. And with these rules in play, we would be able to author a completely new and improved sense of immersion and scale. Now we might not be able to get all the way there right away, but this was definitely the time for us to start working on both the assets, the effects, the tools, and the tech needed for us to get there. So starting with the fundamental dungeon design, the dead space area we're working with is 150 kilometers across. This is basically our active play area. We had another 50 kilometers on each side for the outer border. Basically, this is the kill zone and camera safe perimeter. So this is the furthest you can fly your camera drones before the environment will certainly have killed you.
So we know your camera drone will always be within the outer bounds of this sphere. So now that we know the fundamentals, constructs of our environment, how do we want to design and build this environment? What assets do we want to populate our dungeon with? And how can we make this environment feel like a new, undiscovered part of the EVE universe? We probably don't want to use these good old assets. You've probably seen some of these before, once or twice. And we can't use these. We can't use these. Samar haven't quite found their way out to Abyssal Space yet. So there was no way around it. We needed to build ourselves some new environment assets, and quite frankly, it was about time. So we begin to build some basic environment assets and play around with different scene setups. Here are some very early environment tests. So let's see here. There we go. Yeah, so this is just some early exploration, playing around with some more heavily populated environments. Here we have some min-matter structures placed around the place, which we obviously could not be using in Abyssal Space. Then we prototype some more scenes, basically kit bashing a few test assets together, sticking in a few hundred clouds, guard rays, try out different post-processing settings and lookup tables for different color grading of the scenes. So having played around with this stuff for a while, creating some very cool and super heavy scenes, we settled on an approach for creating our environment assets. Going back to our basic dungeon layout, we plan to build several environment asset sets. Each set would be used to fully populate the entire scene and create a coherent themed environment. And each of these sets would include a number of small, medium, large, and extra large assets. The small and medium asset would be used primarily to populate the 150-kilometer wide play area. So we place small and medium assets inside there. Not too dense. These assets need to have collision and EVE and pathfinding and stuff. It's not beautiful yet, so don't want to make it too dense in there. And we zoom out a bit and adding our camera safe zone. We would add our large environment assets outside the area reachable by the pod pilot and his camera. Simply because assets of this size would be way too big to have in the play area, and since they would need to have collision, they would simply obstruct gameplay also. We don't have camera collision, so having non-interactable assets of this size within reach of a camera would create all kinds of interesting issues. What they do, however, is they create large-scale and immersive environments that we're looking for, exactly what we were trying to do. The environment makes you feel small and visually surrounds and engulfs you this way, rather than just fill up your overview. It also serves to create a nice parallax sensation while you're cruising by the small and medium assets within your play area. These major scene objects will slowly move by in the horizon. But we're not quite done yet, so let's zoom out a bit more. We also wanted to create huge backdrop pieces, mountains of sorts. And up until now, the only major environment backdrop has been our system nebulas. But with these environments, we wanted to add to that. We wanted to be able to place you completely within a specific environment. And also for each set, we created the extra large backdrop assets. Yeah, remember a keep star fits within the red sphere there. So this is pretty big. Probably the biggest assets we ever built. These will not move as you cruise along, but they enable us to create scenery and like at a scale that we've never seen in EVE before. They were a lot bigger at some point, but then they started falling off the grid. So yeah. So these are the basic building blocks of an Abyssal Space scene environment. So let's try and build one. First, we place our small and medium assets within the actual 150-kilometer play area, which is the green sphere. We had our camera safe zone, so we know where to place our large scene assets. And then we can go ahead and place our extra large assets. And this is, see from this distance, this doesn't work. The dungeon kind of breaks at this point. But from within the dungeon, this really works to create an immersive environment that makes you feel small, really to convey scale. We can add new volumetric ray trace clouds that our graphics programmers developed for us. And as we saw before, we can add a lens flare, a light direction. And we can move that. That's huge. This is the first time in EVE we've been able to actually place the light source, place the sun, which is imperative for building these kind of environments. You need to know where the light will be coming from. So this was huge for us. Also, with swapping up the nebula, all the abyssal spaces will be using brand new nebulas. So that will also add to the variation of these spaces. We can change that there. And then we can fire off the process and add the weather that Mirko will be talking more about later, or environment template. So a lot of stuff just happened there in the end. The new awesome volumetric ray trace clouds placed mainly outside your play area for scenery, so it should not melt your GPU. And we got to place the light again at first in EVE. The building of these environments really depends on us being able to do that. But bad stuff can also happen when you try and mess around with the sun. This is some video fraps from some early dungeon test setups. And this is me jogging along in my cruiser, passing the sun. Must be fitted with my Abyssal afterburner there. Yeah. So this is an example of what we can build using the asteroid set. Here's a few examples from that. But we wanted to have at least 2 more sets to give us the environment variation that we were looking for. So we turned back to our visual concepts, stuff that we showed you last year. And we wanted to do something like this, the rock pillar environment. So we created assets for this environment set as well. And from this, again, we would be able to fully dress our environment scenes like so. And for the third and for now, final set, we settled on the crystal environment. And so we built a set for that as well. Here are some few examples of the asteroid assets, or the crystal assets. And a snapshot from like a work in progress dungeon we've built using these assets. But asteroid, pillars, and crystals are obviously not the only thing you will find in abyssal space. Aside from drifters and rogue drones fighting away from home, abyssal space provides a home for another as yet unknown power, the Triglavian Collective, Triglavian Collective. Of course, the Triglavians doesn't just live out of their ships, so in the abyssal environments you will also be running into some Triglavian structures. So this is the concept of the Triglavian Defense Tower. You will be seeing this in the abyssal space dungeons in various states. Here we have some initial concept of the states such as inactive and a few different active states as well. There we go. And here we have the Finnish Defense Tower model. And this guy is pretty big as well. And here is in our engine. Let's take a closer look. Now, what exactly these different states indicate is for you to find out, but safe to say they're not there to try and help you out. But the Triglavians has also constructed gates to travel between their dead space pockets. Gates you will need to use to travel through the encounters. Here's the concept of the gate. And as you can see, the gate, much like the tower, has several different visual and functional states. Here's the gate in its inactive state. CCP Mirko will have some more on this sweet contraption and all the different state a bit later. So we'll just be moving along to some ships. The Triglavian ships. Here are some initial exploratory blockout variations of all the 3 hulls next to each other. And here's a more detailed 3D progress of the Damavik, the Triglavian frigate. And here in client, with its, let's see here, there it is, with its disintegrator activated. And this is some early concept progress of the Vilmak, the Triglavian cruiser. And again, you see the disintegrator fitted in these concepts here. And some further iteration. And here looking into some of the animation for the attack mode of the hull that it goes into when firing its weapon systems. And here the finished base model with some of its effects a bit out of place. Chasing it. And here's the finished Vilmak in game with turrets and effects in place. And again. And here on the right we have the first draft of the Triglavian battleship, the Le Jacques. Here's a few shots of the finished 3D model, pre-texture and effects. And here's a couple of shots of the finished model in our engine. Again, in its aggressive attack mode. And like the rest of the Triglavian fleet, it has these 3 defining 3-pronged hull, aggressive hull. So that's all of them, but before we move on, let's have a better look at these 3 hulls together, and let's look at their individual aggression animations. So, yeah. So another new thing with these ships is this weapon system of theirs, the disintegrator. So this is this guy, and it's a completely new system. If you've no doubt heard about it by now, when it fires, it'll keep going and build up damage as it intensifies. Let's have a look at like some working progress effects for how that turns out on your ship, on their ship. So that's all from me, and now I'll turn you over to CCP Mirker for all the amazing effects work involved in this upcoming feature.
Yeah, thank you. Excuse me. Hello, Fanfest. So let's start with Abyssal Weather. In total, there are 5 archetypes of these, each of which have different levels of strength corresponding to the gameplay effects happening in each. And first up, we have the Plasma Firestorm. And then we have the Exotic Particle Storm. And the Electrical Storm. And the Gamma Ray Afterglow. And then we have the Dark Matter Field. Now you might ask, with names like Electric Storm and Firestorm, aren't these a bit tame? That's because these are the Strength 2 versions of these environment templates, and they correspond to the Strength 2 weather. These weather effects have 3 levels of strength, each at the moment, and get stronger and change visually in many ways. So let's have a look at Strength 1 electrical weather. And moving on to Strength 2. And then Strength 3. You can see a lot of things change in here. Things get more saturated, more extreme, based on the weather strength. And that includes some things, new things, like the near-field particles we have in here for the first time. And these are here to flavor each weather effect. And along with everything else, they get stronger and become more present the higher the tier of weather that you're in. Now let's see what these look like in the game. So hopefully nothing too crazy, we're just adding a bit more life to the universe with these sweet animated particles. But some of you might be thinking, now we're adding all these particles to the scene, and the further you move the camera away from the ship, the more meters per second you can move the camera through these. And with lots of particles, isn't that going to be annoying? The answer to that is yes. So I'm going to show you how annoying that is. And I think we can see that with this. Pretty annoying. So what do we do to address that? Well, we hooked up the camera speed to the visibility of these particles. It's simple, but it works. And hopefully it will make these additions to our environments feel good and not annoying. But now to talk about some much larger environment stuff. Who remembers these bad boys? Yeah. Anybody? I don't know about you, but they look a lot more colorful than I remember. Well, as you probably heard us talk about a lot, we've been wanting to make more immersive environments again. And our road to new versions of these immersive kind of environments kind of started last November, when we prototyped something a little bit crazy. By basically taking one of our cool new stars from last year and then turning it inside out, flattening it a bit, and then making it huge. And then spending some time tweaking the parameters and, giving it some love and polish. And maybe an hour or two later, it looked something like this. So A good shader can go a long way, I guess, even when used for something completely different. And this then gave us a list of basically pros and cons about the sun surface shader as an environment shader, which was then a good jumping off point for how to do this properly later on. And around a month or so after that, when we were back in business after the holidays, one of our programmers, CCP Philip, took a stab at making a proper environment shader, building on, adding to, and removing parts of the sun surface shader. And then it became the cloud cover shader. And then we got to thinking, what do we need to build for this expansion? Well, we need 5 cloud cover archetypes, 5 near-field particle archetypes, which then all get pulled together and loaded through 5 environment archetypes to define the look of the environment. Then if you multiply all that by those 3 strengths, you have the number of parts that had to be hooked up for this to work. But the cloud covers specifically show up in strength 3 weather and potentially above, if we end up adding more layers to that. So let's see what these cloud covers and near-field particles ended up looking like. Now, you won't see that cyclone every time. It may show up in about 1 out of 10 strength 3 firestorm environments. So hopefully it's a bit of a special moment when you do see it, and hopefully you get a little bit of a moment to see it before you get destroyed or have to go through it really quickly. So one or two other interesting things may also show up in a percentage chance of appearance like that in your journeys through the abyss, but you'll have to play it to see those. Now, let's have a look at a couple of the local AoE effects in abyssal space. Here from left to right are the bioluminescent cloud, the filament cloud, and the caustic cloud, each affecting your ship in different ways when you fly through them. And if you fly close enough to be affected, you should be able to notice it on the hull of your ship. Alongside a UI icon as well, of course. So the intention with these local encounter AoEs is that the graphical effect extends outside the range of the area of effect, so that as a player you know that you can graze the edges of it without being affected, and also to combat that you get affected when you don't think you should be. And we also have 2 other AoEs which come from the Triglavian tower. One of which is the Deviant Automata Suppressor, which uses our point defense tech from structures. And we're very excited to see that used a bit more, because it's really cool to see those things flying past your ship. And the other is the multi-body tracking pylon, which you saw a little video of earlier, with its continually expanding severe type of effect, which does something with tracking. Now, let's move on to Abyssal Travel. You might remember this from when Uptight Concord guy showed you this visualization of connections to and within abyssal space. But what does it look like when you travel to abyssal space from K-space? let's have a look at some work-in-progress effects of what it looks like to travel to abyssal space using a filament. Obviously, I'm immediately inside an AOE cloud and in big trouble. And yeah, this is generally how my voyages have ended in the Abyss so far. I'm not even going to tell you how many times I died trying to film stuff for this presentation before enabling basically all of the dev hacks. But what was that thing next to me when I arrived? That little thing over there. Well, that's the trace of the connections between these spaces. And one also gets left behind in K-space until you come back, or vanishes sometime after you perish in the Abyss. It's also been a lot of fun in our internal Abyssal playtests to see bunches of these right outside the station. Game designers, of course, still determining the limits of where you can do this. So something like this may happen, but probably a bit further away from the stations. Looks kind of neat, though. And then we have the Triglavian gates. These have open and closed states, depending on whether you've completed the pocket or not. And they also have somewhat different looks for whether it's a gate between abyssal spaces or a gate back home. First up is the closed gate between abyssal spaces. And then we have the closed gate home. Now, when you complete the dead space pocket, the gate will unlock, whether you're near or far. If you're looking in that direction, you'll notice it changing states, as well as hearing a sound, of course. These gates' open states also look different from each other. And here is the gate between abyssal pockets open. And then we have the open gate home. So that almost wraps us up for today, but before we finish, if you have any questions you'd like to ask, we'll be hanging around the art space for space art, over by the stairs to the first floor after this. And as usual, we'd like to have a little cool video at the end. So we made a short 1-minute Abyssal Dead Space teaser. So here you go. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.